Right, good morning everybody. Thank you very much for coming to the debate this morning. We've got quite a small group actually, so this could be quite interactive and quite lively, I think, especially with the panel we have with us here. I've got a few slides just to sort of position what's going on in the market, what we need to be aware of, what's coming our way as landlords. And you know, I actually think this is probably the most important session of the whole show. Maybe not the most exciting because, you know, compliance and regulation, you know, we all want to get out there and do deals and, you know, grow our portfolios and stuff. But if you don't get this bit right, then everything else can be a bigger problem. So there's lots to know about. This is the panel we've got here. I'll let them introduce themselves in a moment. So just hang on, guys, before you introduce yourselves. But we've got Sean from the Property Redress, the PRS, Property Redress Scheme, David Cox, Rightmove, James Kent from Safe2, and myself from Alphaletz. So we'll intro ourselves in a moment. But just to set the scene a little bit, let's just talk about what's happening, okay, and also what we can do about it to make sure we're completely covered here. So you may not know, but in the last few years, there's been 168 pieces of legislation. Okay, this isn't an exaggeration, this is the actual number. This is Sean's slide, so I'm sure he can elaborate on that. And over 400 regulations. So this is not going away, and it's not shrinking, it's just growing, okay? So, you know, what I'm seeing at Alphaletz is, the smaller landlords are finding it very, very tough because they're busy, they're quite often doing a full-time job as well as trying to manage portfolios. But the bigger landlords are thriving. A lot of them are doing really, really well. They're growing their portfolios, but that's because they have good systems in place and they understand how it all works and so on. So that's some of the stuff we want to talk to you about today. And if you look at, you know, this is the sort of shock factor that is really important. You know, fines now it's not a slap on the wrist and a £50 fine. You know, fines can be up to £30,000 now. It's actually quite scary, and there's nothing more than the press seem to love than our landlords getting a whopping great big fine. So, you know, we have to make sure we've got our bases covered. And here are the top reasons. It's things like failure to license your HMO or buy-to-let. And there's a lot of talk, especially about HMOs around this. Having the wrong fire detections or alarms, something that is easily overlooked. Unprotected escape routes, non-compliant, non-fire doors, trip and fall hazards. You know, I actually had a tenant fall down some stairs and break a leg. It was an awful experience. Luckily, we sorted it all out. But those are the sort of things that, you know, that the government is now trying to regulate and make sure that everyone is protected. Damp and mold. How many times has this come up? You know, I've been through this myself as well, and you know, mold is a really difficult one because I've got a flat. It's a downstairs flat, and they had a small child, and they hung all their washing on all the radiators around the flat, and guess what? They got mold. Never had mold before, but it's one of those where it's, well, is that really a landlord issue, or is it a tenant thing, or is it a bit of both? And how do we keep on top of that stuff? And of course, poor and heating and so on. So I wanted to put those slides up just to sort of frame the discussion. It is a debate, so you know, feel free to ask your questions. But before we do that, let me just hand over to the panel, okay? And let's do some intros. So Sean, can you tell us a little bit about the PRS and what you guys do and so on?
Right, so I'm Sean Hooker. I'm Head of Redress at the Property Redress Scheme, and we are one of the two organisations that all property agents have to be a member of to deal with their complaints. So basically, we're like an ombudsman, and we deal with complaints against letting agents, estate agents, property managers in leasehold, and a variety of other ones that are not by law having to join, but have joined us as property professionals. I don't know how many of you are landlords out there in the audience, but most of you. But did you know that you can make a complaint against your letting agent through the Property Redress Scheme or the Property Ombudsman? This is, what we actually do. I don't know if any of you are out there are property sources, so this is a new kind of area. Did you know that if you are a property sourcer and you deal with sales, you have to be a member of a redress scheme, but you also are a customer of letting agents and estate agents. So you have your foot in both camps on that. So, but we deal with complaints, escalated complaints, and what we try and do is stop things going to court. We try and resolve your disputes with your agent and make sure that we can come to a satisfactory resolution.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sean. We'll come back to the questions in a moment, but that's really helpful. Thank you. So then we've got David from Rightmove.
Hi, I'm David Cox. I'm Rightmove's General Counsel. I'm going to assume most people know who Rightmove is and what Rightmove does. But just to give you an idea, we are the country's largest property portal. Last year, just under 750,000 properties were advertised for sale or let on Rightmove, and approximately 2.5 billion users spent 18.5 billion minutes on the website.
Very nice. Okay. Thank you for that. Some good stats. And James Kent from Safe2.
Yeah, good morning. I'm James. I founded a platform called Safe2. It's a compliance platform to help or to enable landlords and letting agents to use tech for property safety certificates. I'm lucky enough to be welcomed into the NRLA family recently, and we're here to sort of champion for the sector and be the voice of landlords.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys. And myself, I know two of you in the audience already. I'm Richard. I'm the founder of Alphaletz. I'm also a long-time landlord. Excuse me. I've been a landlord for probably 25 plus years now. And in the early days, it was so simple. All we needed was a spreadsheet. And now it's become so complicated that times have changed. And I was looking myself for a good bit of software to help me manage my portfolio. I'm from a tech background, couldn't find the right software, so hence Alphaletz was formed about 4 years ago. And right in the middle of the page, I put this slide up because right in the middle, we put our integrated task management system, because it's probably one of the most important things to do, just keeping on top of, it's not just compliance, but insurance and so on. So hopefully we've got a pretty good panel ahead of you today. So let me say, actually before I get on to the why now, are there any questions? Does anyone have any immediate worries that you'd like to ask the panel? You've got the panel right here at your disposal. Sean, I'll ask you one actually, if I can start it off. So, fines we know are £30,000 or can be. How many of those are, actually happening in the market? I know that's the headline that we will see in the papers, but is that happening a lot, or is that gaining traction? Or?
It's getting better. So if this was a year ago or even 18 months ago, I would say that a lot of the local authorities out there were not actually performing and undertaking the enforcement that they should do. In fact, our good friends at the NRLA did a big report on compliance and found that I think it was about 3 London boroughs accounted for 75% of all the prosecutions in the country. So anybody who's from the London Borough of Newham or Tower Hamlets, watch your backs, but anywhere else in the country you were getting away with it. But to be fair, I've watched it and it started to ramp up. So my organisation, parent organisation, we also own something called Landlords. Very highly recommend you subscribe to that. It's a forum and also a news one, and we are now getting 4 to 5 stories a week at least on massive fines that are being handed out, and these range from rent repayment orders, which is basically if you have not complied with HMO regulations or health and safety regulations, you can end up paying your tenant all the rent back over the period of time that they were there, and civil penalties and banning orders. We've actually had in the last few months we've watched 3 or 4 banning orders coming through. This is taking a landlord and actually banning them from ever or for a period of time from renting out property. So it is ramping up, and I think that the local authorities are getting cute because they can keep the money, and your council are short of money. So this is why they like their licensing schemes. This is why they like handing out the fines. So you have to watch your back because they'll be on you like a rash because it's money into their coffers.
And
I
so
think-
what? Sorry, David.
Just to add to that, something that we've noticed recently is we're getting a lot higher number of statutory requests from local authorities. So they will come to us, particularly thinking about rent repayment orders. When was the property listed for let? So that they can work out, because we will have stats, it went on this date, it went off that date. They will then be able to work out when the start date of the tenancy was for rent repayment orders. So we're getting more than you would expect. I'm not going to put an actual figure on it,
Wow.
but we're getting from local authorities up and down the country. I do think you missed one local London borough that seems to be particularly vociferous at the moment, which is Lewisham. So if anybody is...
I south of the river, I don't.
Yeah. Anybody in Lewisham, watch your backs. They are watching like a hawk the listings that are going on site at the moment. And we, particularly Lewisham Council, we get so many requests from them. Did it contain this piece of information? Did it contain that piece of information? Wow. And because they are under the Investigatory Powers Act, they are allowed to ask, and we are compelled to give. So not just us as any business is compelled when asked under the Investigatory Powers Act. We have
Can
to
you
give
guys
the
talk a
information.
little bit about why some councils have licensing as well as all the other regulation? Because I've got one myself. I've got a flat, and we obviously comply to all the regulation. And then I get a thing through from the council saying you now need to buy a license on top of all that, which seems to be localised because not all councils do it, but just some do. So,
Do you want to keep the PC answer and then I'll give the
So give us-
slightly less PC
Okay,
We're in a
answer?
good debate here.
Okay, so essentially, what's called an HMO, which you all know, which is a property of higher multiple occupancy. They have, it's mandatory to license all of those properties, but a lot of other councils also have selective or additional licensing on top of it. So the reason for that is a variety of different reasons, and I would say the two legitimate ones, and then maybe
I'll just
David
share
can
some
talk
views.
about the other one. But it's essentially they want to, because of their planning their plans, they don't want they want to regulate the number of HMO properties in certain areas. So if it's a family residential area, they don't necessarily want people buying those properties up and converting them into HMOs. And it's also health and safety within those HMOs, because when you convert a property into an HMO, you need to take into consideration a lot more health and safety issues than if you are just having it for a family home. So yeah, that's a licensing. It's very controversial. It comes down to perception in some ways, but also some councils have basically set up these schemes and not done any enforcement, and it just seems to be a way of getting money out of the landlords.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of...
Of course, yes. Please do.
On the licensing, can they do that retrospect? So like an Article 4 or HMO, you either set up an HMO if it's an Article 4 area. Can it then retrospectively become an Article 4 area, and then they retrospectively require that HMO to have a licence, even though it's been set up maybe 5 years before they brought in the Article 4?
So an Article 4 is a planning for HMOs rather than
They're linked, but they're
licensing. So with an Article 4 direction, if they designate an area in Article 4, the house will automatically, if it's already an HMO, then it will automatically become a C4 HMO.
Yeah.
Under the permitted development order, you will be able to automatically revert it back to a C3 family dwelling house, but then, so say you've got students in it at the moment, so when the designation came in, it was an HMO. Your next set of tenants are then a family. It will automatically transfer back to a C3 dwelling house. But if you then, the tenants after that, you then want to put students in, for example, then you'll have to reapply for planning permission to turn it back into a C4 HMO. And then, depending, as Sean said, normally it's 20% within a 100 chimney pot radius.
Okay, so you're talking about the licensing, which is separate from the...
No, that's the planning one. Licensing, once the designation comes into force, if you meet the criteria, you have to get the license at that point in time.
How many people here have HMOs? Okay, about half, and everyone else houses, flats. Yeah, Yeah, so it's,
It was one of the problems when, especially when Article 4s came in about, I was still at the NLA, so a decade ago. A lot of places, so one of the first places and somewhere that the NLA, as it was back then, actually put in a judicial review challenge to was Portsmouth, because what used to happen in Portsmouth was students would live in the properties during term time, and then they would be holiday lets during summer holiday, and then the student, which worked for the students because then they only pay 10 months of the year. But when the council created the Article 4 direction, they couldn't lose the C4 HMO, so the landlords couldn't put the families in during the summer, and it effectively killed the holiday let market.
Yeah.
It also meant that students in Portsmouth had to pay 12 months rent again as opposed to 10 months rent.
Right.
So it entirely backfired, and this is primarily the purpose of licensing. So I remember a few years ago I gave evidence before a select committee on licensing, and there is absolutely no evidence anywhere in the country in the last 15 years that a licensing scheme has actually achieved the desired results. Anywhere at all. And even Newham, we are in the London Borough of Newham, the first pan-borough selective licensing scheme. Sir Robin Wales pumped millions and millions and millions of pounds into enforcement. 10 years later has had absolutely no impact whatsoever on property conditions in the London Borough of Newham. However, it's the NIMBY issue, and people going to their councillors saying this bad landlord down the road, this bad property, these bad tenants, and they are being created not because they are solving a housing issue, but to give politicians an opportunity to say we've got tough on the private rented sector in our area at the expense of landlords. And people have different views on the fact that the council gets the money in. Yep, that keeps the people employed in the councils, but it doesn't actually make the councils money. Newham lost millions on their scheme. Liverpool lost, I think, tens of millions on their scheme when they did it. It actually ends up losing the councils a lot more than it gains, but it gets politicians re-elected. Sorry if that's a very cynical response.
Yeah.
Hi. From Sean, Property Redress Scheme manager. If the state agent is not a member of a PRS, or wasn't, like online estate agent, how are we supposed to pursue the, basically complain against, to the next stage apart from the court, basically? Because as far as you know, Estate Agent Act doesn't apply to online estate agents.
It does.
Can I, Sean, before you answer that question, can I just repeat it, because we've got a camera at the back and they may not be able to hear you over there. So the question is, the PRS can prosecute, bricks and mortar, if you like, estate agents for shops and so on. But if they're an online agent, how do you guys handle that?
Right, so online agents are covered under the Act as much as a high street, or what we see a lot of is people, not even setting up offices, they're working from home. Everybody is covered if they are managing a property under the definitions of letting agency or estate agency. But,
Sorry, we do respect letting agent, yes, but not, basically estate agent, like a sale or marketing,
Okay, if they are engaging in the sale of property or the buying or selling of property, they are covered by the estate agents regulations, and they have to be a member of a redress scheme. Now, this is where it becomes a little bit controversial and silly, and it needs to be addressed. Because the estate agency regulations are older than the letting agency regulations, the worst case scenario is if you're not a member of a redress scheme as an estate agent, the fine is only £1,000. Now it's 5,000 for a letting agent, which it should be really 30,000, because things have moved on. And also, how do you track these people down? Because they don't actually. If you've got an office, I know that if you are a local authority and you can look at at an estate agent, you can walk into their office, you can look at them online. You can pin them down. A lot of these online agents, where are they? They're national. So who actually will take the prosecution? So they have to, but if they are taking the view that they're not going to get caught, it's another matter. But certainly, if you've got evidence of an online agent that is not complying, let me know, and I can hand over that information to the right authorities to get it enforced. But if you are engaged in letting agent business or estate agency business, you have to be a member of a scheme.
We have another question here. Yeah.
Can I ask a similar question? It's not about estate agents, it's about property management company, who in my case are dealing in tandem with the freeholder and not doing their job repairing the leaks. And for the fourth year I'm having every winter twice leaks, heavy leaks. Tenants are complaining, we are complaining, they are not responding to it.
That's a good question.
Okay, so
Sean?
again, in leasehold property, so this is long-term residential management, they also have to be a member of a redress scheme. But it's a little bit more complicated because anything that's to do with their obligations under the Landlord and Tenant Act, so things like setting of ground, the collection and management of service charges, but there is a third property tribunal called the Property Tribunal, the third tier tribunal, and those go through that. We deal, however, with the service element of the members who are members of our scheme. So if they are not responding to your letters or to your telephone calls, you can come and complain to us or the TPO. So you have to say, who is your redress scheme? What's your complaint procedure? And we're not happy. Now, the problem you've got with leasehold properties is because your landlord may be, you as a landlord may be the leaseholder. You have your tenants who live in that property have no direct relationship with the people who manage your property. It's only through the leaseholder. So it becomes kind of like about who are they communicating with? Primarily, the relationship between the property manager of the building is with the leaseholders. Okay, there may be a residential management company that is managing it on behalf of the residents, or it may be run by the freeholder. So it's quite complicated. And yes, we do find a lot of kind of just trying to wheedle out where the responsibility is and who they are accountable is difficult. And I have to say, sometimes it's a little bit like one of these, these viruses. You need multiple kind of vaccines to try and deal with it. So you're not going to have. I'm off after this meeting to ARMA, who are one of the regulating bodies of property managers, and it's a constant thing there. It's not clear, and the government needs to actually get their act together and make it a single kind of process. They're doing it partly with the building safety management stuff, because they're now taking into consideration that your tenants have got rights for living in the building, which they've never had before. But it's going to be a long, slow process. I know that's a very long answer to your question, but it's not easy at the moment. We are part of the solution.
We know that renters have all the rights against landlords if they are not doing their job, but landlords do not have any rights against the freeholder who is not doing it.
Correct, and that's one of the gaps that's in the situation. Landlords, you don't have to be at the moment a member of a redress scheme if you're a landlord. Your agent has to. The property management of your leasehold property has, but the freeholder, the person who owns the building, they're a law unto themselves at the moment. Although you can go to the tribunal and take, which is kind of like a court, but a little bit less intimidating than a court, but it's still a long process and it's quite intimidating. And I'm sorry to say that a lot of the leaseholder issues I deal with, they are long-standing and they go on for years.
Yeah.
And we have the most upset people when it comes to leasehold complaints, because not least because we can't deal with all of their problems. So there has to be a longer term solution to this.
It's a really good question, that as well, because I've got one as well myself, and the service charge company is doing a terrible job. Sounds like yours probably is as well. And they're saying, well, what we want is one of the landlords to come on the board and to help us manage this stuff. But nobody wants to do it because we all think we're going to get liable if the service charge goes. So we actually have no control whatsoever, and it's a real issue. It's a very good question, and that's some good information, Sean. Thanks for that. I would like to bring
various provisions. By the way, if you do have either bad freeholders or bad managing agents, you can collectively, as the leaseholders in a building, take over the management of the building.
Yeah, right to manage it's called, isn't it?
Right to manage. Collective, legally it's called collective enfranchisement. And you need 50.1% of the eligible leaseholders. So if you've got shared ownership or social housing in there, they don't count. It's the leaseholders that actually own the flats. But as long as you've got 50.1% of those, you can apply to the court for collective enfranchisement, take over the right to manage, take over the management, and then, I mean, personally, I would recommend in today's day and age, particularly if it's a high-rise building, to go and use an ARMA agent who will be able to manage the property very professionally on your behalf.
An ARMA agent? What's that?
Yeah, so look, so there's...
Association of Residential.
Yeah, it's the Association of Residential Management Agents.
Yeah.
So you look out for this sign called ARMA. If you've got a property manager individual, they would be see if they've got the qualification, which is IRPM, which is Institute of Residential Property Managers. They have merged into one organisation called the Property Institute, the Property Institute. So look out for the either ARMA, IRPM, or Property Institute when you against your management agents. The reality is that most of the big blocks in the country are managed by big companies. But if you've got a smaller block, you could find it's your local estate agent or letting agent that's actually dealing with it. So the smaller blocks, it's another kind of string to their bow. And what you find in that is if there's no problems, there's no issues. But when the problems come, that maybe they're not as qualified or as competent to deal with it, you don't find out you've got a bad agent until something goes wrong, and that's the real test. So if you've got an agent that's not giving you any problems, you think they're a good agent, but it's when it's tested.
I would like to bring James into the conversation because poor old James has been very quiet and very patient. So James, you've got a great solution to help people with this, keep on top of stuff, haven't you? Called Safe2, and you're the founder. And you recently got acquired by the NRLA, so congratulations there. Are there any things in particular that stand out? Is there a big request for one type of compliance, or is it general stuff? Or tell us a bit what you're seeing in the market.
Well, it's a mix really. I think landlords are looking for convenience when it comes to the regulations and the compliance. There's so many different regulations coming around, and with the rental reform and everything that's happening, people are looking for simplicity and just convenience, right? So I'm a big advocate for tech. I believe it's a massive enabler when it comes to compliance, things like this, helping with tenant referencing, viewings, EICR, anything that you is a pain or a sticking point for landlords, can be simplified or at least made easier by tech and having some sort of solution for it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many things to remember.
Yes.
And the good news is that the EPC thing has been reformed, shall we say, before it became, as it was about to blow up into another big thing. I know Ben and the team are big advocates for that. So
it's kind of paused at the minute, I think. They're but indefinitely.
Just for those of you that didn't know, there's a new regulation coming or proposed that if a property wasn't an EPC level A, B or C, I think it was, then you had to bring it up to an A, B or C. So if you had an old property at a D or an E, potentially the cost could be thousands, because it's all insulation, central heating, new double glazing, and obviously that was just undoable for a lot of people. So anyway, it looks like people have seen sense on that.
I would add that the properties that have an EPC A to C have doubled in the last sort of 10 years or so.
Okay.
So there's a lot more better, more efficient properties out there.
So properties in general are just getting better anyway.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Richard, I was speaking to James the other week, because something that came to my attention which was quite concerning, and one of the things that I think we're all very, very concerned about, when we're landlords, is complying with the health and safety regulations. EPCs are about energy efficiency, but there's a whole lot of health and safety regulations. And of course now you've got to have your gas safety, you've got to have electrical safety, all of these things there you've got to diarise and everything else there. And James's solution, actually helps you to do that. But the one thing that kind of came to me was actually, because of the way that regulations go, you have dates. You tend to find that kind of everybody's renewal comes up at one stage. And next year, in 2024, there's an actual big spike in the electrical safety and in gas safety for compliance. And actually, there's been surveys out there that show that actually the number of engineers and qualified people who are qualified to do these tests are, they're as rare as hen's teeth. So if you're due up for one of these inspections, you might struggle to get the person round to actually do the inspection, or you're paying for the nose for it. So, James, you spoke about you were looking at this and the solution that you could actually...
Yeah, I mean, it's trying to proactively do your EICR, so it's coming. So when the regulations came in for the EICRs a few years ago in England, there was a massive spike, obviously, and everybody left it the last sort of 4 or 5 months before the regs came in, the deadline, to get these EPCs done, and there just wasn't enough support, or the demand was just too great. So we know it's coming. The EICRs have a deadline of between 3 and 5 years. So proactively getting it done, looking for the any kind of remedial work that's doing it. Inspections going from there is definitely a better way of doing it.
Yeah.
Question.
Yes, question. Yes.
I have an electrical question there. So I've got buy-to-let single household properties, and the EIC. I just want to check on the legal situation with EICRs and pack testing for the individual appliances. I've just recently used Open Rent to let out a property, and they've got everything there, sort of check the EICRs. We had pack testing on there as well. Now, EICR, my understanding is that it's every 5 years, or at a change of tenancy, it's recommended. First question, is that a legal requirement for buy-to-let single household properties that it is done every 5 years? And then secondly, on the pack testing of the individual items, I'm not quite sure on the legal status of that.
So the EICR of the 5 years is a rule of thumb. So it's a maximum of 5 years. So you just definitely check the expiry date. So an electrician does have the right to deem it, it's satisfactory, but it should be checked more frequently. So he may only do a 1 year or a 2 year or a 3 year expiry date. So it's not a govern that it's just for 5 years. So there's definitely there. It definitely does need an EICR, without a doubt. It's a blanket if you're renting it. It needs an EICR. So watch out for the expiry date. And then in terms of the pack test, it is a little bit of a grey area, but officially, no, you do not need legally to have a pack test. HMOs are a little bit different, but you do have a legal responsibility to ensure that any appliances you supply are of a good standard and safe to use, and the best way of doing that is with a pack test. So it's kind of, if you supply the appliances, get a pack test.
It's a best practice one. Some local authorities in their amenity standards for licensing, be it selective, additional or mandatory, also have pack testing as a local authority requirement as well. So if you're subject to licensing, check the amenity standard guide, because you could end up falling foul of the licensing if you don't have it pack tested.
What age? Because I understand new appliances are okay. Second, where you put appliances for a while, I don't know at what age that kicks in on the appliance.
So if it's a brand new appliance, it would count for the first. The rule of thumb is every 12 months, every year you should have a pack test on it. Yeah, but obviously if it's brand new, then that would suffice for the first year. That's
a good question actually. So if you put an EICR in, and then 2 years later you change an appliance, how does that?
The EICR is actually for fixed. This is where a little bit of confusion.
Yeah.
So it's for fixed wiring. So the appliance wouldn't be tested on an EICR. So it checks the cables going to the socket that will house the oven, but it actually doesn't check the oven itself.
Yeah.
So the EICR and pack test are separate. They're just both.
Good question.
Electrical.
Thank you. And the other,
just go on to licenses. Selective licenses, does it apply to HMO or any buy-to-let?
Which license?
Selective license.
Selective license. So the question is,
the definition of what they're going to include.
So if we go from the biggest down, mandatory HMO licensing is 5 or more persons in a property. that applies everywhere at a national level. Next one down is there are two types of discretionary licensing, either additional HMO licensing or selective. Additional HMO licensing is where they reduce the criteria for mandatory licensing in a small part of a local authority area or a whole local authority area. So what they could say is houses in multiple occupation that are three or more persons comprising two or more households with shared amenity, that now needs licensing in this ward or in this borough. Selective licensing is every rented property irrespective of size in a given geographical area.
Okay, so interestingly, it's a very good question, because if you have more than one property or 3 or 4 properties, especially in London, you could be over ward boundaries, you could be over borough boundaries. You're going to think, what the hell, which licensing what applies? So interestingly, for example, I've known this person for ages, but all of Shields runs an organisation
Exactly the same.
called Hammer, right? And I believe that Hammer are partners with the NRLA. And you literally put in your postcode and it will tell you your property exactly what licensing, which one you need, what it is for, and how it applies. And you can do that. I think there's a platform on the NRLA website. You just tap in there, and is it free to NRLA members or?
To members,
to members, and you get it all up there, and you don't have to worry about it, because literally we know borough boundaries just go down the middle of streets. So you could have 2 properties in the same street with 2 different regulations that you have to apply
And
to.
what's the name of that product that does that?
Kamma?
Kamma.
Yeah.
Okay, Kamma.
And to give you an example, I think at the moment there are 568 different licensing schemes in England alone. But I know a street in Exeter, one street has 3 different types of licensing. So it literally depends on what number house it is on the street as to what type of licensing, if any, it actually needs on that street.
Yeah,
And that is literally how ridiculous it is at times.
Yeah.
And yet the PRS is unregulated.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then, of course, we have the Renters Reform Bill coming as well. So that's more change. Good and bad.
Which is due a second reading, actually.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, it is due a second reading. I mean, it almost sounded like it was about to happen, like next week when they first started talking about it. But I think the reality, I did a talk with Paul, actually, Paul Champlina. You'll find it in our YouTube channel when we started talking about the Renters Reform. There's a lot about it. Sean, maybe, do you want to just summarise it for us and tell us?
Right, okay, so the big headline that everybody is probably been most animated about, okay, which I'm going to just very touch on because we could speak all day on it, and I'm not the biggest expert on it, someone like Paul Champlina. This is the abolition of the Section 21 no-fault eviction. That's animated most people, because that means, at the moment, you can serve your 2 months, as long as you've got all your ducks lined up. Your tenant has to vacate the property within 2 months of you giving them notice. And it allows you that flexibility to change tenants, without actually having to go through long court processes, in theory. The problem with that was that in the past, because the other way of evicting tenants was so hard, everybody went down to Section 21, and they were, and it was seen as being kind of like an indiscriminatory way of getting rid of tenants. Although the evidence wasn't really there, because most people serve the Section 21 because they've got rent arrears. But this flexibility was going to be abolished, and the government has spent some time trying to look and say, well, actually, if we're going to get rid of that, we're going to need to have grounds that you can legitimately get your property back. And so they want to add some new grounds, things like, I want to take the property back to sell it, I want to take the property back to move back into it, etc., etc. But it's going to make your life a bit more difficult. What's more important to me, though, is that they are talking now of trying to introduce standards, and standards, what they call the decent home standard, which applies to the social housing sector. Don't laugh, I know you've seen all the things in the press about how poor some of the social housing in this country is, but they do have a standard of standards there that do dictate how the quality of a property, and the statistics are there to show that compared to the private renter sector, they have better quality properties on the whole. Where there are less bad quality properties in the social sector than there are in the private sector.
Who's saying that, Sean? Sorry, I'm just curious.
There's an NRLA thing that says I think it's 80% of private houses are up to the standard of it. And
okay. Because certainly the stuff you see on the news, and it's all the social the housing association.
Let's not beat around the bush. The 20% that is crap, let's call it that, is ultra crap in this sector. Yeah. The rest of it is good quality. Yeah. And this is it. The satisfaction rates in the private rented sector are very high. But it's that 20% that drags down everybody. And it's not just the fact that you get it in the neck. It's the fact that it's tarnishing the reputation of the industry. And everybody thinks because you're a landlord, you're providing rubbish quality property when you're not. We need to deal with that 20% of really poor quality. And that's what a lot of these fines should be focused on is dealing with that. At the moment, the problem is it's indiscriminatory. And one of the things I'm in favour of, okay, now we've talked about licensing and registration, but if the government can get this bit right, which is basically a national register which incorporates a compliance portal, if they can get that right, all you would do is for a nominal fee, and this is what I've said to the government, is, we've all said to the government, this has to be a nominal fee, that you can register your property, you can have you can show on that portal that you are compliant with every part of the legislation, and that that you are able to deal with the health and safety issues that are needed. What I compare it to is like a black hole. Nobody has ever seen a black hole, but the reason you know they exist is because you can see all the bright stars around it. And where's the gap? You can then focus your enforcement, you can focus your energy on that. Now, to be fair, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, you would say, this is all pie in the sky. Until you talk to someone like James and say, well, actually, we've already got that. We've got a system that works and that, and for 85 quid for the NRLA, you get all that on a plate. So that's to me is a non-brainer. We have a register. We know where the bad people. We know that the bad people won't join that, but we can then focus our enforcement on that. Good landlords that comply, and it's affordable, easy to use, and it helps your businesses.
Just want to add on that, there's the Section 21. So the NRLA have been talking to Michael Gove, I'm sure everybody saw. So they are not ready to push the button on Section 21 until they do the court reform as well. So that's only minimal happened on that. So until the court process is better, they're not going to push the button to get rid of Section 21.
And I think that the biggest thing people are scared of is, what if you want your house back? So, it's a no-fault eviction, tenants been paying their rent, but maybe you've been renting out your personal residence and you want to move back in. That's when you can exercise Section 21, whereas Section 8...
There will be a new ground for if you want to move into the property. So they're creating a few new grounds. They're tweaking some of the existing grounds in the renters reform to try and make it fairer for landlords. And actually, a lot of what they're doing is replicating what happened in Scotland when Scotland did their version of renters reform back in 2018. So there will be a ground for if you want to sell the house or you want to move back into the house. What they are doing, though, is of the current 17 grounds that are in Section 8 for regaining possession, some are caused by the tenant, some are caused by the landlord. So I want to move back into my house, not the tenant's fault, so landlords will have to give 2 months' notice. For grounds that are the tenant's fault, I haven't paid my rent, they'll only have to give a month's notice. So they're trying to make it slightly fairer between landlord and tenant. The tenants get longer, it's not their fault. Landlords get less time.
Another question,
Yeah, on the Renters Reform Bill, it's not so much getting possession of the house because I want to do certain things to it because there are grounds for that. The thing that really concerns me, and apart from the court system, is there, and I can't remember the detail of the provisions, but if a tenant doesn't pay rent, it's almost like three
strikes and you're out.
Chances at paying it before you can take proceedings. But I mean, and I've been lucky. I've been very selective on the tenants that I bring in. But there are some tenants who play the system,
Yep.
And I always understood under Section 8 that if someone literally pays 50 pence towards their rent on the day of a court hearing, they get away with it and it protracts proceedings. Now, I don't see that the Renters Reform Bill really addresses that, because for me there's still that loophole, and that's what worries me more than getting possession to sell or live.
That's a good question. Yeah.
I think you're absolutely spot on that one. So what people do at the moment, if you look at the 3 rent arrears grounds are 8, 10, 11. Ground 8 and 10 are mandatory grounds. The court has to award possession if it meets the threshold. So 1 is persistent late rent arrears. 1 is you're more than 2 months.
Yeah.
In arrears.
The last one I can't remember. But what happens at the moment is you have to be 2 months in arrears on the date or at the hearing. So if the tenant comes up to you and pays down to the 2 months minus 1 penny, then you can't go into that hearing and say my tenant's 2 months in arrears, because they're not. They're 1 penny less than 2 months in arrears, at which point the case fails. So what the government has done is said, if that happens 3 times, then the court has to award possession. And I think this is going to be one of those moments where we actually look back in history and start. Government has not learnt the lessons of history. It is recreating laws that existed 2 generations ago that didn't work. And we had the Housing Act 1988, which created Section 21 and no fault eviction. Before that, it was a discussion with the tenant of I can either go through the court process and evict you, and it's going to take me months and months and months and cost thousands of pounds, or how much money for you to leave at the end of the week. And apart from the property portal, Rightmove does also run a referencing and tenant insurance arm as well. And since the pandemic, since the courts got shut down, and dealing with the massive backlog that was in the courts that had to be dealt with when the courts reopened, when the bans on evictions were lifted. I know it's galling for any landlord in the room, but you are running a business, so try and take the emotional, you've stopped paying rent, I want my money back, and try and think of it as a commercial hat on of, I've got to get them out and this property rented again to start generating income again. So I do think we are going to go back to a period where it will be, I can spend the next 8 months getting you out through the court, getting my county court judgment and my debt order against you, but you've not got any money, therefore I'm never going to get any of the money back anyway. Or here's your deposit back, here's your first month's rent on your next property if you sign that you agree to surrender the tenancy on Friday. And it is what a lot of the insurance companies are doing already. So if you take out rent guarantee insurance, your rent guarantee insurance company will pay your costs of evicting the tenant. They will pay your rent up to 6 or 12 months, depending on what policy you've taken out. But almost all of them now are starting with mediation with the tenant of what do I need to pay you to get out of this tenant.
It's a licence for extortion.
It is.
It is, yeah.
If there's a tenant who's going to play the system like that, they're more than likely to know that and will just put the price up.
You are right. And there is no doubt there's going to be some serial tenants that do that. But look at Scotland. Scotland's had this for 5 years. It has increased the number of landlords in Scotland that take out rent guarantee insurance. And the way the insurance market works, the more people that take it out, the lower the risk, therefore actually the lower the premium. And since the pandemic, we have seen more and more landlords taking out rent guarantee insurance, which, whilst you're right, and you're thinking, well, that's going to shoot my premiums up. The more that take it out, it will stagnate or maybe even lower it. And we've seen the premiums that we charge to landlords and agents actually going down over the last 2 years because more are taking out policies.
I'm a massive fan of it, huge fan. And I mean, we offer it too, and you can get it for about £15 a month for rent guarantee insurance. It's so cheap for what it offers. And like you say, it covers you for all that period and up to £100,000 of legal costs. It's an absolute no-brainer. Yep. But I would also say, 2 things I do is make sure the references are absolutely, gold star. I know it's not all, people do slip through them, I know. And then the other thing I always try and do is speak to the previous landlord. because there's nothing like that conversation to really understand how good they were with payers. But, you know, we all get caught out, so for £15, it's a bargain. Yes, question here at the front.
Yeah, thank you. Apologies for being a bit late, but
That's all right.
Landlord challenge.
Sure.
So, I've been a landlord for 20 years and generally successful, but some big, evictions and the like. Recently, just managed to get a tenant out. And it was really good actually, because in Haringey, and they actually rehoused my tenant and her 4 kids without having to get a bailiff order, because so that was just amazing. So that saved like 6 months, I think, because in London now, so that was amazing. But just done a complete refurb and decided, need to get building regs, regularisation. I didn't have the time to do it before. And just concerned about fire regs, over specification, and getting a surveyor to do some calculations. I saw that those 2 were there. I don't know what was said about unprotected escape routes and non-compliant or no fire doors. So we're going to have to do that. But the local authority building surveyor is saying you're going to have to get some calculations. We have put in beams in the 2 openings. We've just done an open plan kitchen. I'm just kind of worried about, he's given us one name, but where are we going to find someone that can do it pretty quickly and at a fair price? And what about if he's over specifying what we might need? Because he was talking about putting in doors when we've just opened up, and my husband's saying, well, can't we just have a fire escape door? Which he's saying, yeah, we can do that. But just wondering, where do you stand with the building control when they come in and, don't want them to get over heavy, but obviously they have to do what they do, but you've got to do enough to keep your tenants safe.
My advice would be that there's fire risk assessors will come round and they'll look at the whole building as a whole, and they will give you a report on the best course of action and what they deem will keep it up to standard. So things like the doors, the fire exits, the fire blankets, and anything like that it might need. Making sure if the consumer units under the stairs or the gas is under the stairs, making sure that they're properly insulated and fireproofed or moved. And they will give you a pretty damn detailed report about what needs doing, how it needs to be done, and what will keep you up to standards.
Who are these fire risk assessors? Sorry.
Well, you can order them through Safe 2, that's for sure. So
there we go.
Straight into it. They're just if you went on to Safe 2, they're fire risk, so they are just approved. They're approved to like BAFE or IFE. They're just regulatory governing bodies that will make sure that they can get it done right.
How finding a building surveyor to do these steel calculations, I think might be somewhat problematic. Are they readily available, or is it going to be really
so the fire risk assessor, he wouldn't do so much the calculations on the beams or anything like that. That's more, I guess, I'm going to guess, an architect or something, maybe. I don't know if I'm entirely honest on the beam measurements, but the assessor will go through things like I said, like the stuff on the stand, like the stairs and the fire exits and routes.
And they should be able to advise who you might need as a follow-up.
Absolutely, they'll know and they'll know the local authority really well, obviously, so they'll be able to tell you exactly what needs to be.
Yeah, good question.
It's the fire risk assessor. They go in, they tell you what to do, then you go and do it.
Yep.
And then you get a certificate or
so
you wait for building control to go in. Check it.
So it's a real complicated one actually, because so they'll tell you what needs doing to keep it up to standard. It's up to you whether you do it or not. So there's not really a pass or a fail. It's just we recommend this being done. If you choose not to do it, you can legally rent your property. You can do what you want. But if the worst happens, you need to be able to stand up in court and say, "I didn't do this because."
Oh, okay. That's the point. Yeah.
Leave yourself.
You don't want to gold plate this. But there's lives at stake.
Yeah, absolutely.
And your asset as well. You don't want that going up in smoke. And this is the thing. A lot of the fire assessors are ex-fire. Retirement plan for for firemen to get in there. But it's also understanding your local authority and what their expectations are. And one of the things that we're still going from a period of time at the moment is that the building safety regulations, which have been passed as the Building Safety Act, they're still being worked through. And we have seen a kind of a situation where, at the beginning there was that standard and people were trying to meet that, and now it's saying, well, actually, no, it's a risk-based approach, and that really, that's at the end of the day, if you take the risk-based approach and you got all the due diligence in place for that. If the building goes up in smoke, you can turn around and say, well, that's just an act of, was outside of our control. What people are a bit afraid of is that, that if you don't do that, if you go to court, this isn't about a fine, this is about going to prison. Yeah? Or worse, so, and you don't want that on your conscience.
No.
So you want to get it right, but you don't want to kind of like overspend on it and to get it up to that quality when you don't necessarily need to do it. And it might be, overplaying the whole situation and delaying, you putting another property back on the market, which is desperately needed to house people. So it's getting that balance right.
We've only got a few minutes left, and there's a
can I
gentleman
just add
waiting
one thing?
very patiently. So let me. Yes.
About speak to previous landlord.
Yeah.
I know it sounds important, but how do you know he's not trying to get rid of a dodgy tenant from his property?
Well, yeah. I mean, it can happen. It can happen. I mean, we offer a free tenant. It's like a tenant checklist. So you can download it for free, and it gives you like 20 questions to ask the landlord. I mean, there's always going to be ways that they can slip through the net, but just as many checks as you can. Look them up on LinkedIn, look them up on Facebook, try and get some history on who they are and what they're saying.
They'll do all of that for you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
type in the name and national insurance, and it will get that
absolutely.
whole background for it. So.
Yes.
You do that?
I don't. There is somebody in NRLA that does it, I think. So if you are a member, it's definitely worth looking at it. But no, not right now, not for us.
There are two different types of referencing, by the way. There's the sort of the ones that you do yourselves, or there's the ones that you go and pay an agency to do, or things in between. So it depends how you want to do it, but I would strongly recommend, particularly as we go forward into the Renters Reform Bill, to get
good references.
To get a reference.
Yeah. We've got time for one more question. Go ahead.
Time for damp, that sexy topic. I've just recently seen government
put out some guidance a few weeks ago.
Just made me want to cry. Government guidance on damp and mould, presumably in the wake of television coverage of social housing and the death of that
Little baby, AWAB.
Sorry?
AWAB, his name was Little Baby,
and it's basically saying it's all the landlord's fault. It's, in essence, not the tenant. So landlords, get your act together. And it's incredibly frustrating because we all know that tenants, there's different types of damp and mould. How much of a bearing does this guidance have in terms of a regulatory compliance, legal perspective, or is that the first step towards the government moving that way? Because it's very concerning what they've written in terms of apportioning blame.
Okay, well, very briefly, we've only got a couple of seconds, right. Number one, they're not saying it's the landlord's fault. What they are saying is that the landlord should take responsibility to try and rectify the situation, and not to just put it down to lifestyle and ignore it. That's what they're saying. Okay, right. So I will say from Property Redress Scheme, we will take that guidance and consider it very carefully when we're dealing with damp and mould issues. Okay, so at the moment we're only dealing with the letting agent's responsibilities, but if they move into, as they're planning to have landlord redress, that certainly will be a consideration. So we'd have to take guidance, we have to take very seriously. However, we know that in the real world that it's complicated. And what I would be looking for if I was dealing with a complaint or trying to mediate on this situation is that was the landlord proactive? Did they try and do inspections? Did they try and give help and advice? Did they go round with the £2, less than £2 squirter and give it to the tenant and say squirt it on the bloody stuff? And it's not hard to do that. Did they do that? And then because at the end of the day it's your property and you don't want that being damaged, but it also you're trying to help the tenant to not affect their own health and welfare. I think you're absolutely right. It does put a bit more onus onto the landlord, and it will mean that you would have to be a bit more hands-on than in the past. But I think overall that is probably a good way forward. For the good landlords will not find this onerous.
I'll reiterate on the inspections, just regular inspections, and see this and prevent it from happening. Proactive maintenance is
Document
always
them as well, because they don't always let you in. I know that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I haven't got a damp problem. I mean, I've sorted all the damp out in the house, and I've just got a tenant moving in with a tumble dryer. And I've said you have got to properly ventilate, because I've seen this thing in action, and it spews out moisture, and I've just no. I mean, and that'll be nothing to do with me. Given the instruction, I suppose it's damp inspections, but if they let you in, something like that. No,
absolutely. But that's about the documentation. And I say to agents, because we do inspections. Well, where's the report? Oh, we just emailed the landlord if there's something wrong. Well, I said, at the end of the day, there's no record that you've even been there. How do they know that you've actually gone there? Go there. I mean, it's not a full inspection, but it's there to actually, to be documented, and a few pictures, without intruding on the tenant's lifestyle. They're not going to object to that, but just to document it.
Guys, we are going to have to draw a line. I'd love to. We could probably talk for
Can I
hours.
just make one very quick point on the mould one?
One last point.
On the mould and damp, legally, there are slight distinctions. So if it is rising or penetrating damp, that is always the landlord's responsibility, because there's a defect in the property. So that is always your responsibility. You will always get prosecuted for it, because you're responsible for it. Where it is mould, you want to think about the mould triangle, which is heating, insulation and ventilation. Have you done as much as you can to mitigate the likelihood of damp, the likelihood of mould, by having appropriate insulation, adequate heating and adequate ventilation? If the tenant chooses not to put the heating on or chooses not to ventilate the property, there's nothing you can do about that one. You're then protected. But if you haven't got adequate heating, adequate ventilation, adequate insulation, then the likelihood of mould is going to be much greater than if you did, and therefore that is the trigger from tenant's responsibility into your responsibility. So legally, penetrating, rising damp, always your responsibility. Mould, tenant's responsibility, unless you have not mitigated the mould triangle.
Right, we're going to have to. Brilliant, good comments, and thank you for all the questions. I was really interesting. I want to thank again the speakers. We are supposed to be out of here, so we will have to call it to an end. Sean, David, James, thank you all so much. Hope everyone has a good show. Thank you.